Well, on Rebuilders today, we are joined again by Terry Walling. Mark, what do we explore today?
It's a corker.
Oh, yeah, we went with cracker last time. This time it's a corker.
I think if you're a leader who is feeling in the last season at this time a sense of isolation, a sense of floundering, a sense of what I used to do isn't working, a sense of am I doing the right thing? Am I in the right position? I think all of these things, and you find yourself in a culture which is also asking those questions. I think today's episode's for you. We talk about what is it to be in a leadership transition, a period of wilderness where you know God's going deeper in you, but you don't exactly know how to work your way through it. So today is all about that. So just encourage you to grab a pen, take notes. I think you're going to find today really, really helpful.
Yeah, and if you want links to anything that we mentioned or a list of the resources and books that we talked about, you can find that by subscribing to our mailing list and heading to rebuilders.co to do that. Hi, welcome to Rebuilders. My name's Liddy and I'm here with Mark, Daniel, and again, Terry Walling.
Hey.
Welcome
nice to be back.
Welcome back for another episode. Yeah. Last one was a cracker.
Does that mean good? I think it does.
Yeah.
Good. Cracker means
cracker.
good.
Yeah. I don't know where that comes from.
Could
Does
be
anyone know?
saltine cracker. And then, so
It was a belter.
A belter.
It was
a movie, Cracker Jack.
Snorter.
Remember Cracker Jack?
Yeah, I do remember Cracker Jack.
Wait a minute. Cracker Jack is that American, baseball, Cracker Jacks.
Yeah, it's
all of that.
I think it's a different thing.
It's about lawn bowls.
Lawn bowls, yeah. Which I don't think you have in America, lawn bowls.
Malloy.
We don't have lawn bowls.
You don't have lawn bowls?
No.
They've got bowling bowls.
There's several things in the British Commonwealth we didn't import.
Yeah.
and lawn
Okay.
bowls are one of them.
Yeah, that's a real shame.
A sense
I know.
of decency.
Of
Scandalous.
correctness. Let's play a game for 4 days, a match, and have no results, but we did it in a correct way.
If you're talking
Sorry,
about cricket,
British fans.
I'm on your
I'm
team.
picking-
I'm not about cricket.
It's actually 5 days.
Forgive me, I've said
Sorry, just to correct you
it's
there.
5 days.
And you do that several times. yeah.
And you bring out a tea card in the middle. What?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't. Is that
I
still
gotta
a
get
thing?
off of that.
Oh,
Surely.
yeah. They have drinks.
They have drinks.
Drinks, but
They
not.
have their lunch break, like our
Yeah.
lunch.
Tea
There's lots
cart.
of breaks. Yeah.
Forgive me, Brits. I have sinned. I'm sorry. Okay.
It's a sport based around tea drinking.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
I like it, just for the record. I like cricket.
You like cricket. Is there a reason why you like it?
Look, if we're going to go there, I think I particularly like test matches, which is the 5-day
Right,
match.
I do.
Because it's often in Australia, it's played over the summer break, which is just the time of year where you kind of relax and you can it's a bit of a background sport then.
Yep.
And you can have it on the background, have some mates around, chatting, having a beer and you're kind of watching the cricket, but not really. And then a wicket happens every 2 hours.
Yep.
Everyone cheers,
Yep.
and then you kind of go back to what you're doing.
And those are the very things that drive an American crazy.
Yeah. Okay.
Although
A sport played in the background? Come on, mate. What are we talking about? And then you can have it on all day, and maybe there's they pick up 2 wickets. I mean, I tried. I really did.
it was actually big in America for some time.
Really?
Yeah. And I think cricket historians can correct me, but I have a feeling the first international was in America.
Wow.
And I think there could even be like quotes from the founding fathers about how American cricket is and stuff like this.
Wow.
It was big for a while.
Interesting.
Here's a question.
There I
Have
go.
you heard of rounders?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's kind of baseball-esque.
It is.
Like kind of cricket, baseball hybrid.
Together a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but God's sport is baseball, and so American baseball. And so that I reinterpret everything through that lens. Okay, I just wanted to.
I will say
They're all shut down now. They're not listening. Yeah.
having been to the States and been to a baseball game, there's a lot more. They really have to pump up the entertainment to make it interesting.
A baseball game.
Yeah, they had like t-shirt cannons and hot dog cannons, and it was a whole thing.
Daniel,
Look, this
Be
is
careful.
as an Australian.
be
observer,
careful.
observe
You
this.
just wanted to see that because you're such a cricket fan.
Yeah. Well, Lydia and I are watching a war here brewing between cricket and baseball.
It feels like a
I'm not insulting.
tennis
I'm
match.
just saying.
I'm trying. I
Australian
started
observation.
it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Well, there's some sports trivia for all of you sports fans out there. But today's episode, what a smooth transition that was. Speaking of transitions,
It was beautiful.
we are going to be digging into something that is very dear to your heart and something that we've chatted to you about before, and this notion of leadership, transitions, and contribution.
Right.
These three areas, and I guess it would be great to start by hearing from you what you're observing in leaders at the moment, particularly ones that are reaching a point of being in transition and trying to figure out what it looks like.
Right.
To what do you need to do next?
Yeah.
What happens next?
Yeah. Yeah, I never, it's one of these things too. Some of you are wondering, so what's my, contribution or whatever? I never really thought this would be it.
Yeah.
Okay. But having studied under a guy named Bobby Clinton, he wrote the book, The Making of a Leader. I was part of a research study of 4,000 to 5,000 leaders and their lives under the premise that God shapes and molds leaders. How does he do it? How do we join with him in it? That started me down a search of trying to help us who are trying to live our lives according to how he shaped us, figure out what he's doing so we can join him, as opposed to getting caught by every fad and every new way of describing a leader. Anyways, all of that started to reveal the fact that one of the most important moments in the shaping of any individual's life, any Christ follower's life, but in particular leaders, is the in-between. And in the in-between, if you've listened to some of the other podcasts, God does some of his most important work. The problem is we want out because we can't control that moment, but God wants in.
Yeah.
And that in-between moment, you don't know where you're going. You can't go back to where you've been. If you think about it, is not just a description, though, of us individually. Since the COVID pandemic, it's really been a description of us collectively. Yeah. In some sense, we've been in a global transition. And I'm not just talking about the culture, I'm talking about the church, I think, where God is actually starting the process of doing something different. Not different in terms of not linked, but different in terms of advancing our understanding of who he is, how he wants to live out his purposes, and how in the changing context, leadership looks, church looks, everything. Some of you have read this, but I read a book, Great Emergence, Phyllis Tickle. Basically, she talks about the 500-year period. With the last 500 period, we had a major move of God, Reformation, 1517. Oddly enough, 2017 starts the brewing of, the potential transition. All of that to say, I've been coaching a lot of leaders, and global transitions often put leaders into personal transitions.
Yeah.
Because they're charged with the difference between a leader and a follower's perspective. So leaders oftentimes are sometimes out in front of or feeling what's happening more than the followers feeling it, because they are charged with the responsibility of leading God's people forward.
Got it. Yeah.
Okay. So transitions in and of themselves are huge. Really, the way to navigate a transition is to lean into it and get all you can out of a transition. Quit fighting God. You're not going to know for a while where this is going. This is not a bad weekend that you've had. This is actually a period of time when God starts to rehearse your values, heal some of your deep wounds, bring you to a new sense of understanding of what it is to be a leader, according to who you are. And he starts giving you hints of where this thing's going. All that happens in a transition. So here's the point. 3 months to 3 years sometimes with transitions. Everybody loves to hear that. They take some time. And being an American, we hate that. We want instantaneous. We want immediate. We want formula. All of it. Help me navigate. Here's what you've got is actually as you lean into a transition, you begin to recognize that God is doing a deeper work within you. And another way I say it, what got you here was really important, but it may not take you there.
Yeah.
So you're going to need some new ways of working through, understanding, and aligning with God's important work. And when you study lots of individuals' lives who try to live their life, you see 3 major stages in our development. And each one is preceded by a transition. So 20s and 30s, you see a awakening transition. How am I going to live my life? What's the direction? 40s and 50s, you see another transition I call the deciding transition. Of all the things I do, what am I not going to do? How do I start to understand my part in the bigger narrative versus doing everyone's part?
Yeah.
And you can see sometimes that holds leaders back. And then the last one is the finishing transition. And in the finishing transition, how do I discover what now I have so I can hand it off to somebody else, and that's legacy. So all of that, that's a mini crash course, probably too much, but it gives you this realization that if we're going to go to a new place, then God's people and his leaders need to go to a new place in our growth and development.
Yeah.
And we're not going to be able to lead tomorrow in the same way we led yesterday. And it's not just because the context changed, it's probably because God's doing a deeper, greater work inside of you as you minister into that context. So a lot of attention gets put on the context, and a lot of the internal gets almost put aside, thinking I'll get to that later.
Once I'm through the transition.
Once I'm through the transition.
Yeah.
What you don't realize is it's actually working inside of you too, a personal transition to take you to the next chapter of your leadership.
For leaders listening, what does it feel like, or people listening who, wondering if they're in a transition, what does it feel like to be in a transition?
There's several different characteristics, but the inability to focus, the lack of energy to move on, that sense of how come everything I used to try that work is no longer working, that sense of discouragement that I may not ever get out of this hole, that sense of understanding that, in the midst of all of this, God is doing a deeper work. I'd rather not him do the deeper work. I'd rather him continue to use me externally. So they don't want to go to a new place with him. So resonant inside of us is this kind of restlessness. And that restlessness makes you feel like you're in a bubble.
Yeah.
Everyone else is sorting it out or going on, and I'm staying here. That's what in the name of the book, I'm stuck.
Yeah.
That kind of, I'm a fish in the fishbowl. Everyone's looking at me, but they're all going on. That's often some of the key feelings around transition.
So almost a sense of isolation.
It's total isolation. And isolation processing sometimes kicks off a transition. Negative preparation kicks off a transition. What's that?
Yeah.
A bad thing happening to a good person. Ministry conflict can kick off a transition where God's using that conflict to actually start to highlight, there's some, if you're going to make it, there's some deeper work we got to do. It's not just all bad though. Sometimes it's actually great success. And the person begins to go, oh no, now what? How do I keep this going? How do I repeat this?
Yes.
How to actually grow this?
Yes.
All of that restlessness starts to actually bring us into a cycle that a transition typically goes through.
I'm just not going to pause, but recognize that probably there's a lot of people listening going, oh man, is that me? And we often joke, like I had someone, I've had multiple people say, like, we'll often say, oh, you may be running in the park now and stopping, like I'm just guessing that it's probably people driving cars at the gym, doing chores at home who are like, oh, they just put language to what I'm feeling. The classic almost model of what we think ministry success looks like in our minds, because it looks like the culture is person who enters into ministry, preferably young, because our culture likes youth and has incredible gifts and natural talents, the right place, the right time, does it all right, looks all great, broadcast that to the world, and success.
Right.
And that's really the complete opposite of what you're saying. Also, I'm just thinking, I have numerous questions. I'm sure you've got some.
That's fine. Go for it.
Two in at once. I'm also sensing that I wonder if we're here, like, okay, so we've talked before on here. Okay, here's my point. I think that it's so right you're saying that. It's not just leaders going through it, which I'm sure you've
Right.
helped leaders through this
Yep.
for years,
Yep.
but it's the culture.
Right.
You know, there's been this conversation around the great, after COVID, the great resignation.
Right.
Then there was quiet quitting.
Yeah.
And we talked the other week about the great resentment, all this frustration coming out. What does it look like when you're a leader and you're in transition, but you're leading people who are also in a kind of mass transition?
Yeah. It's so hard.
Yeah.
It's so hard. And I think this is one contributor to the burnout issue that's happening all over the place. I hear leaders struggling with, I don't have the energy. And hopefully, without giving an answer of how you do it, but hopefully maybe just knowing that's probably what you're feeling. You're feeling that not only is the culture in a transition, it has thrown me into a transition. So the enormity or the impact is felt in leaders in far greater ways than the follower, because it's put them in a transition. So one of the things that helps with the transition is it has a name. In other words, to acknowledge the fact that not only is the culture in transition, I'm in a transition, and many of you are in a transition. So let's actually normalize that we're in this in-between period of time. Let's for a while quit trying to figure out, now this is the hard part, what it looks like on the other end, what the forms all need to now say, and how about we choose to get all we can out of this moment and go deeper with God. In other words, chase him in new ways. Quit trying to chase the answer, chase him. And let him do a deeper work in us. Because if he doesn't do a deeper work in us, we're not going to do a wider work for him. So they're tied together. And if we can it's almost like a ruthless honesty. Let's just be honest. I'm going to be honest. I don't know where we're going. I don't know what it's all doing to me, but I do know one thing. If we travel together, we can better do what I think the key is right now, gain voice recognition. What is Jesus really saying? Before we try to figure out what it all means, what is he saying? What's he doing in us? Because in all renewal movements and everything, it always is personal renewal.
Yes.
Before it is corporate change.
Yes.
So I tell leaders, listen, it's time to be honest. Not everybody's going to like that.
No.
And everybody's going to be clamor for, tell us what we're going to do about it. How about first off, we decide what he's saying to us about us, and then let's decide what it might mean as we try to help them.
Does this also for you account? I mean, it's interesting. Like one thing that I've just noticed as I've traveled and we've had people write us lots of emails to rebuilders is there's been this great moving of people in the church. So we saw that in the culture where people like move to the beach or move cities or whatever. But we've also seen this almost like I was in one city and they said basically 30% of every church has moved to all the other churches and churches swapping people.
And all over the place.
Yeah, so that you're seeing that too?
Oh, totally. In the U.S., absolutely. A third is gone, a third is moving, and a third are ruthlessly trying to hang on.
That's interesting. And also one thing I'm seeing as well, you've got some churches who've lost a third, so like we're 30% down or whatever. Is a third 30%?
Close. 33.
33.
0.33.
It's interesting too, hearing some other churches like, oh, we've had lots of new people come, which is great, but they're like, well, they're not really giving. They don't want to volunteer. They're just coming every 3 weeks. And they're finding a new church where they can sort of do that. What you're saying is effectively the answer to all of that is actually an internal thing
Yes.
in the leader.
Yes. And that's being hit with resistance. No. Answer. Not surrender. Give me the answer. No, the answer is surrender. That is not going over excitingly well for every person. Because that answer of surrender means God using this time to do a new work in me.
Yes.
Yeah, but you don't understand. I've got to do this, and I've got kids that are doing this, and I got wonder about that and everything like that. And so, but if you look, that's how God does it. Every time God moves in, he moves in first on the people. And I was hearing, in the renewal time that we had last night here at church with you, the reality is that revival and renewal is about people. It's not, we think it's about structures and forms. It's about the people. And when the people get renewed, then they have new eyes and new courage to do something with the structures. So for years, we've actually trained ourselves that you can change the church and therefore that will change the people. No. You change the people who in the end will have the courage to really change the church. And that backwards, forwards kind of thing in America especially is, let's just hold on, do the same thing, do it better. All of that type of thing is actually holding back a new work of God. And so leaders have to be courageous to lose. Wait a minute, Terry, I've already lost people. You're talking about I could be losing more people? You could. En route to you being different, your people doing different, so that we can now minister in a different day. And that's what transitions do. Transitions actually bring us to a place where we value and we do different things based upon the new work God's done inside of us. You only need new wineskins if new wine comes. Well, what if new wine comes? You're going to need some new wineskins. Although that period of time we're in right now, I believe he's moving in to do a new work. So it's going to require first us to have that ability to stay strong in the midst of even losing the marks of success that we've had for the last 40 years.
I'm wondering on this, based on sort of the age breakdown you roughly gave at the beginning, the 20 to 30 for awakening, 40 to 50 for deciding, and sort of 60 onwards for finishing. I understand that, I guess, a lot of people that might be experiencing this transition are a millennial generation. A lot of these are our listeners. And you're talking about, wanting to get the most out of a transition. Right. What does it actually look like, without necessarily getting specific and practical? What does it actually look like to get the most out of a transition?
Wow. Good question. I think it actually depends on the transition that you're in.
Sure.
In the awakening is, how am I going to live my life? But I think most of our listeners have gone through that one, but it's that middle one. And in that middle one, when you get to the late 30s, mid-30s, late 30s, something starts to happen where you start to ask this question: am I doing it? Is this it? Is this what I'm supposed to do? Is it actually ever going to make sense for me? Will I ever fully understand what my unique part is in the grand narrative or not? And if we just take that one for examples, that would be the deciding transition, then it has two components to it. It has going after God in new ways. So get all you can for them means start to recognize that even the patterns and the rhythms that you use probably are going to need to be enhanced and changed. New sacred rhythms, new ways of chasing him. And it's probably also going to mean, when you get all you can out of it, to understand that of all the things I could do, what should I be doing? of all the things that are out there that need to be done, that I get trapped into, what are the few things he's uniquely gifted me to do? And getting all you can is chasing after, Lord, what is it what are the good works which you have authored before time began for me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about narcissism, building all around you. What I am talking about, though, is recognizing it goes from in America, we have the big searchlights, in the city, to all the way down to now it's got to go down to the flashlight or the torch. And we recognize there's a lot of good things in the future I am not going to do. En route to the key things he has created me to do. And being willing to dive in and pray, but especially review your life to date. Think about what it is, how he's used you. Those moments when actually he's really moved in. That's what I mean by getting all you can. So it's getting all you can by going to new practices and getting all you can by going after greater clarity.
Yeah.
That takes some time. That's not a quick thing. That takes some time. And when people have the courage to go after it, he wants to tell us more than we want to know. How about that for a little ditty, huh? He wants to tell us more than we want to know, because here's the final thing. It's going to require choices.
Yeah.
It's going to require you doing even some things that used to give you a lot of quote unquote kudos or success, but now in the future could distract you from doing the few things he really wants you to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that close? Is that helpful?
That's really helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that, like, you're hitting home pretty well, I'm sure.
Would you say he's hitting a home run?
Am I hitting a six?
He's hitting a 6 home run. Yeah.
Come on.
I imagine this requires a lot of dying to self in that kind of that honing process, because you're saying no to things which you feel like you've had to control. But as God's asking you to hone that, you're kind of relinquishing control.
Yes.
And not necessarily you're not sure what happens with those things you're saying no to. But I suppose is this where God goes, I've got this kind of thing in those things you're saying no to? Or
what do you think, Daniel? Yeah. And this is the moment in time too where you realize that probably by doing too much, I've actually held off other people doing things. And probably by doing too much, and this is going to hurt, but I could have been doing some of these things out of ambition, not alignment.
okay.
When I align, it means I'm not going to be everything to every person. And as I align, I've got to realize that maybe the things we were doing even were good things, but he's not asking us to do them right now. Yeah. One of the things I say about this is the prize of surrender is revelation. If you're willing to surrender, he can reveal. And that process of surrender is very painful, very hard, gone through it. And yet the reality is it starts to show you what he's at work doing.
Yeah.
I was going to ask too, like often in that, like when you're younger and perhaps you're part of a crew of different people, perhaps you leave a seminary, perhaps there's people at your church, perhaps there's people in your city, and you're sort of moving together and it essentially can be swept along with the energy and the peerhood. Is that a word?
Yep.
Peers, with your peers.
Peerhood. That's
Peerhood. No, that's when you get a knighthood, isn't it? Is it a peerhood? Anyway, so you're going with a group of friends, but then one thing I've noticed too is you get to that sort of 30s and all of a sudden not everyone's coming with you.
Yep.
And I even wonder as well, like is part of this transition, so that's normally a dynamic. And I think for people who, this is me observing, that also around that dynamic now is that if you look at the education system, as it has been, it's very much like, how do we all contribute together? How do we,
Yep.
if we're all together, it's good. If
Yep.
someone's sticking out, it's bad. You're doing something wrong. So almost when all of a sudden you start to feel isolated, or hang on, my peers aren't coming with me, or I'm having to raise up above,
Yep.
that can be a sort of death to self. So it's maybe less, I think you're right, in past generations where it's like, maybe I don't do everything and let other people have a go. I'm wondering if now, for in that 30s
Yep.
stage, it's actually, well, now it's actually me stepping away. It's not so much letting others have a go, it's me actually stepping forward into what God is calling me uniquely to.
Right.
And that's not connected to the others around me. It's just
Absolutely.
what he's calling me to.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why sometimes, this idea of being self-defined, this idea of being able to understand that I've got to grow in my awareness of who I am and then make choices related to that,
Yes.
is oftentimes a lonely experience,
Yes,
a hard
yes.
experience, a difficult experience. And one of the things, obviously, your audience is all over the world, but one of the things I think for you who are Australian, this makes this even more difficult, because that rising above, that almost distinguishing to, not because of better, just clarity in terms of who you really are, actually then becomes countercultural to that issue of, how dare you rise above us? We all must travel together, kind of deal. And that tall poppy thing. So bottom line is, I think for any culture, that's difficult.
Yes.
Every culture has its challenges with that. Every generation has its challenges with it. The collaborative leader, I think, is a very important, even new model for some, where we need to go. But also we need to see that collaborative does not mean all the same.
Yes.
It means uniqueness working together in the context of community. Yeah.
And just to add to, I think what we've learned on this podcast is that other countries have tall poppy, and New Zealand and Scandinavia and Ireland and
Even America, even though, it's our brash Americans out there, we love it. We honor John Wayne. All of that thing is true. But I also watch it happening, especially when leaders and even in smaller churches try to lead.
Yes.
There's a defined culture that basically says nobody leads here.
Yes. Yes.
Nobody goes out ahead of where we want them to go, kind of a deal.
Yeah, totally. So for those who are listening, who find themselves, and that's a lot of our audience, I think you're just probably describing where they're at, you're describing the moment. What are some practical first steps? And in some ways, just also add, we've talked a lot about grey zone. And I think that grey zone is what you're describing.
Yep,
grey zone is a
absolutely.
cultural transition between eras. If you're going through transition, you're leading in grey zone in a cultural transition, what's some just initial starting steps that you would say to people?
Yeah, good. I think this sounds obvious, but we don't get to clarity alone. And every person in a transition feels isolated. By the way, just knowing it has a name sometimes just helps.
Yeah.
But really part of leadership development is this idea of both the need for processing and response. And having somebody, a coach, somebody along with you. By the way, coaching pulls it out, mentoring puts it in. So let's kind of make sure we're not talking about traveling with somebody who has all the answers. Traveling with somebody who can help you process, help you better hear God's voice, that's not going to try to solve you or solve it, but help you learn what God's at work doing. Premium. The people who make it through the transition and get all they can usually have walked with somebody else.
Yes.
That's the first thing. Second thing is understand that just by its very nature, our transition is going to take some time. So grant yourself and grace yourself. Grant yourself that ability to understand that, grace yourself that this will take some time. I'm not disobedient. I'm not going against God. I'm not, bad person or anything like that. It's just going to take some time. So grant and grace. Grant yourself the being normal and also grace yourself. And then probably the third thing is understand that as you go through the transition, a transition has various stages to it.
Okay.
Probably the biggest part of a transition is I describe it as around a circle kind of wheel or whatever, but it's that time when all of a sudden you're evaluating and you're aligning. And a lot of people think, okay, I evaluated where I'm at. I'm aligning with God. I get the goodies. Yeah. No, oftentimes it goes back then to more evaluation and more alignment and more evaluation and more alignment. You feel like you're drowning underneath the current of confusion. And know this, just about the time you're absolutely clear this is never going to end, that's when it probably ends. And God starts to take you now and connect the dots, lead you to what he has for you. And yet know this, it's going to require faith to go to the new place.
Yeah.
There'll be a faith challenge at the end. Well, why in the world then would I want to go through all that? Because now you're convinced God has led you there. And you were willing to step into the new based upon the time you invested to process the past.
It's I just drew a little circle in my notes here because it reminded me of something. I think it's James Chong and Ryan Pfeiffer in their book on revival and renewal have this point. They've got a similar circle. It's like a big renewal sort of thing. And they have this point where I think it's like test of faith or something where, I just thought of it when you said it, like you get to this point where you do all the right things and you get to this point like it's not happening.
Yep.
And it's like, that's the extra pushing through point. It's just before it comes. I just thought of that because at that point, I think there's a lot of exit ramps.
Yep.
I just also and so with that as background, you said something really interestingly to us as a team when you were with us recently, where you said transition doesn't mean necessarily a vocational or physical change.
Right.
Whereas I feel like there's a whole catalogue of options that our world gives us, like, I've tried to push it and it didn't work, so I'm going to move cities, I'm going to move jobs, I'm going to do this, I'm going to dye my hair, whatever, like something to change. Just, love you to talk into that.
What,
temptation.
the dyeing the hair or the... No,
Sorry, so that was a little strange. Feel free to dye your hair if you want to. Don't dye your hair if you think that's going to put you in spiritual transition. Just that, because I feel like probably there's a lot of people, we've all been shaped by the culture of immediacy who have been like, okay, well, I felt this starting to hit. Like, I've been listening to Rebuilders and, we started listening in 2020 and, I was like, it is now 3 years later, pandemic, cultural change. I've been going through it. Yeah, off ramps.
Yeah. Well, how about two things? One, transitions are not vocational, they're developmental. So that's the first thing. That's the thing you heard me say.
Yeah.
Transitions are not primarily about our vocational assignment.
Yes.
They're about us moving to the next stage in our development.
Yes.
Sometimes it does mean a net change in what I call the delivery vehicle or the job or the ministry assignment. But primarily they're about us taking a new person or a new work of God in us to the situation that we're in. So that's the first thing. The off-ramps that happen sometimes, though, is right in the middle of this surrender alignment period of time. It is uncanny, both the opportunities, the options, or even the distractions that come. Because people sometimes want to jump out right there. It's never going to end. I'm done.
Yeah.
All right. And we've got them floating all around out there. Another time people will say to it, okay, it's not happening, so they wander away, and it's more of a distraction. It's more of a stuff that they get into a little bit, and sometimes it's medication, and they get into all sorts of different things. I'm not talking just about drugs. I'm talking about relationships and everything that take them away. And a third response sometimes, even in the midst of, okay, they either leave or they go away, they plateau. They arrest in their development.
Yeah.
They lock it in. They won't go to a new place with God. Sometimes they think they're punishing God by doing that.
Wow.
They were actually going, well, you know,
Yeah.
if you're not going to give me the answer, then I'm not going to go any deeper.
Yes.
What do you think about that? Almost this bargaining with God. So those are the off ramps that people often take, as opposed to chase him, go after him. Terry's not talking. I know, go after him. A lot of people hit the wall that period of time when he seems to not talk. Why is that happening? He wants to know how bad you want to know. And in those moments, it's that going after him that actually then creates that opportunity to get all you can out of the transition.
That's really good.
Well, I imagine that this is hitting a chord with, or striking a chord with many of you. I know it is for me. So thank you, Terry, for your insights.
Sure.
If you're listening and you're like, this is the beginning of a conversation and I do not know where to go from here, there's a number of resources that are actually really helpful through Terry's organization, Leader Breakthrough, which is leaderbreakthrough.com. Bunch of resources on there, and even the ability to connect with coaches through that organization. Highly recommend the book Stuck, which helps navigate the notion of transitions when you are feeling, as the title suggests, stuck. And there's also the Leader Breakthrough podcast.
Right.
But yeah, just want to say, Terry, that it's so deeply helpful to have this stuff articulated, but also I know for me that it will end.
Yes.
To even have you say, this is a period of time that will end.
Yeah.
In those moments that it feels like it definitely won't.
That he really good.
Yeah.
They do come to an end.
Yeah.
Really good. And then you have what you have.
Yeah.
What you're willing to go after. So
Yeah.
they do. And
Yeah.
when they do, that's the net result then of getting all you can.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah. So thank you.
You bet.
We may even be able to squeeze one more episode while you're here. Hopefully.
We'll see.
Yeah. Thanks for being with us, Terry.
All right.